Welcome to this week's edition of Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, your trusted source for insights and analysis from the world of espionage, foreign interference, sabotage, and national security and terrorism. Neil Bisson, retired Canadian Security Intelligence Service, intelligence officer and director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network, brings over 25 years of frontline intelligence and law enforcement experience to unpack the stories shaping our increasingly volatile world. This week, a calculated act of sabotage disrupted the Cannes Film Festival, prompting serious concerns about Western infrastructure vulnerability. Meanwhile, in Washington, more than 100 National Security Council staffers were abruptly purged, raising questions about institutional memory and policy continuity. We also examine new espionage charges in Germany linked to Russian intelligence, and India's major crackdown on Chinese-made surveillance gear. And back at home in Canada, new reporting reveals the disturbing rise of transnational repression by Chinese state actors as we continue to wait on a Foreign Agent Registry Act. What signal does this send to Canada's adversaries regarding foreign interference? Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Neil Bisson, a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. Each week, I break down the stories shaping the world of espionage, foreign interference, and national security to provide you with the insights, analysis, and intelligence you need to understand the shadowy world of spies and how it affects your job, your country, and your life. From increasing threats of transnational repression in Canada to more arrests of Russian spies in Germany, we had another busy week. So let's get into it. Our first story this week comes out of France, where suspected sabotage caused a major power outage on its final day of the Cannes Film Festival. A substation was deliberately set ablaze and an electricity pylon sabotaged, leading to a blackout affecting roughly 160,000 homes and businesses. While the film industry scrambled to adapt, this incident has raised serious questions about the intent behind the attack and who might be benefiting from such disruption. This wasn't just a random power outage. French authorities have called it out as an international act of sabotage. With an international event like Cannes taking place, the timing seems deliberate. Two distinct attacks occurred, one at a substation in Ténéron, and another involving the physical cutting of a pylon near Villeneuve-le-Beau. This level of coordination suggests premeditation and operational knowledge. These weren't just random vandals. Whoever did this knew where to hit, how to cause maximum disruption, and when to strike, just as the eyes of the world were focused on Cannes. This act of sabotage does raise other concerns. Specifically, if high-profile civilian events can be easily disrupted, it speaks volumes about the vulnerabilities in Western infrastructure, especially during soft targets like cultural festivals. Europe has seen a rise in low-level sabotage operation in recent years, often suspected of being linked to proxies or operatives working at the behest of adversarial foreign states. We previously covered railway sabotage across Germany, arson against NATO-linked facilities, and infrastructure tampering in the Baltic region. France itself has been on high alert, especially after domestic unrest and growing tension linked to foreign interference. But what's interesting here is the convergence of soft power in the form of global cinema and media attention and hard disruption through sabotage. Targeting cultural events like Cannes is about more than just lights and logistics. It's also about undermining confidence, embarrassing a nation on a world stage, and testing response capability. While there have been no official statements about who might be behind the sabotage, several French security experts have floated the possibility of politically motivated eco-activism or foreign actors. Intelligence circles in Europe are particularly attuned to this kind of gray zone tactic by the Kremlin, where the line between criminal mischief and strategic disruption is blurred. Whether it's linked to geopolitical actors or internal unrest, the key takeaway is this: modern sabotage doesn't need to be explosive. It just needs to be timed, targeted, and disruptive enough to raise alarms. The Cannes sabotage wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a statement. Whether the perpetrators were sending a political message or probing Western infrastructure, the implications are serious. France and other Western nations will need to start thinking beyond military and intelligence targets. Cultural events, public infrastructure, and even tourism are now part of the national security calculus. We can expect further investigations and possibly even more hybrid-style attacks. We head to the United States for our next story. A dramatic shakeup out of Washington, where more than 100 staffers of the National Security Council have been placed on administrative leave as part of a sweeping restructuring under the interim National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. The decision, delivered last Friday afternoon before the Memorial Day long weekend, has left many in the intelligence and foreign policy communities stunned and raises serious questions and concerns about the future of institutional memory, stability, and intelligence coordination in the White House. This wasn't just a bureaucratic shuffle, this was a purge. According to reporting, over 100 NSC staffers, including career officials and political appointees, were given 30 minutes to clear out their offices. The mass removal followed a Thursday's principals meeting and a sudden Friday afternoon announcement, catching many off guard. The manner and timing are striking. This is a body responsible for coordinating America's foreign policy, and one that integrates intelligence, military, diplomatic, and security insights for presidential decision-making. Cutting it down so abruptly, and amid rising international tensions, signals a major shift in how foreign policy will now be reshaped. Through the lens of intelligence collection and informed policymaking, it is troubling. A large group of experts is crucial for managing complex global crises. Cutting that capability, especially when many were detailees or executive branch members temporarily assigned to other agencies, risks creating blind spots and bottlenecks. Under Trump's first presidency, the NSC was already sidelined in favor of direct White House control and political loyalty. This latest restructuring seems to extend that trend, prioritizing ideological alignment over subject matter expertise. Rubio, now temporarily leading both the State Department and the NSC, is reportedly pushing for a top-down model that consolidates foreign policy decisions within a very tight inner circle. This mirrors patterns seen in more centralized regimes, where gatekeepers and loyalty override broad-based consultation. It's also part of a wider movement to cleanse the administration of individuals deemed insufficiently loyal, some reportedly targeted after far-right influencers lobbied for their dismissal. This doesn't just weaken the institutional knowledge, it politicizes the very structures meant to deliver balanced interagency intelligence. The reshuffle follows an earlier misstep by the former NSC head, Mike Waltz, who mistakenly included a journalist on a Signal Group chat about sensitive military operations. That error, while serious, seems to have opened the door to an even broader crackdown, one that some insiders are calling reckless and unprofessional. Unnamed officials described the email process as abrupt and even humiliating. And the question reportedly being asked during re-interviews, what is the appropriate size of the NSC? This suggests that a premeditated downsizing was underway, masked as an administrative review. While reforming bloated bureaucracies is sometimes necessary, doing so without a clear public rationale and during a time of global volatility is counterintuitive, and most likely risky. The mass sidelighting of the NSC staffers raises urgent questions about how the U.S. foreign policy will be shaped going forward, and whether key national security decisions will be made based on expertise or allegiance. For allies who rely on U.S. coordination, including Canada, this could signal reduced interagency engagement and a more unpredictable foreign policy environment. For adversaries, it may look like an opportunity to exploit chaos and diminished oversight. We head to Canada for our next story, where we're examining a troubling reality that has gone largely unaddressed by public institutions, the rise in violent extremism in Canada and how it's impacting Jewish Canadians in particular. Based on a recent op-ed by Terry Newman in the National Post, the article explores the RCMP's acknowledgement that violent extremism is now a prominent national security threat, a warning that was first prepared in December, but only made public after Canada's most recent federal election. The article outlines a concerning trajectory, a measurable rise in terrorism threats, an increase in youth radicalization, and a surge in anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric and violence since October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. According to the RCMP, terrorism charges have jumped by 488% over the past year alone. The public release of this intelligence threat assessment, months after it was completed, raises serious questions about transparency, politicization of national security, and public safety. Israel's recent issuance of a Level 2 travel warning for its citizens visiting Canada highlights just how seriously some foreign governments are now viewing the risk environment for Jews in this country. This is more than just a public safety issue. From an intelligence standpoint, it represents an erosion of social trust, a failure in proactive threat communication, and a widening gap between classified assessments and public policy action. Canada's national terrorism threat level remains at medium, meaning a violent act could occur and hasn't changed since 2014. Even though we've seen 18 extremism acts since then and 6 foiled plots just in this past year. Globally, Canada's allies and Five Eye partners have taken a more assertive posture. France, Australia, and the UK have all elevated their threat levels, yet Canada has not. The article also points out that despite the frequency of Islamist-inspired attacks, CSIS and the RCMP's public reports avoid naming terrorism groups like ISIS, ISIL, or Al-Qaeda outright. That's a curious omission, especially when we know these groups continue to inspire and direct acts of violence within Canadian borders. Add to that the rise in violent rhetoric surrounding events like Walk with Israel, where calls to harm Jews have been openly shared online, and the decision to withhold threat assessments from the public becomes harder to justify. Former CSIS analyst and my co-host on the weekly podcast Spies Like Us, Phil Gursky, rightly asked the question that's on many minds. Could the government's decision to underplay these threats be politically motivated? CSIS spokeswoman Lindsay Sloan acknowledged the increase in extremist activity but defended the unchanged threat level, pointing to successful disruptions and enhanced use of peace bonds and terrorism charges. That may be true operationally, but it does not reassure communities who feel the threat growing more visible and more violent by the day. The op-ed also calls out vulnerabilities in Canada's visa screening, youth criminal justice law, and the lack of scrutiny of foreign funding to Canadian academic institutions, all of which have been exploited in past years by terrorist actors. The threats outlined in this article are real, immediate, and interconnected. Youth radicalization, Islamist extremism, hate-fueled protests, gaps in enforcement and policy, and the growing sense that the Canadian Jewish communities are increasingly vulnerable. This isn't just a story about one community. It's about our collective national security. When Jewish Canadians are targeted, when terrorist plots are rising, and when radical ideologies are spreading through online platforms, protest movements, and foreign funding, we need our intelligence and security institutions to respond swiftly, transparently, and with courage. This isn't about raising alarm bells for the sake of fear. It's about being honest about the threats we face and taking concrete action to prevent them. For our next story, we examine a powerful expose by CBC News and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists that uncovers the disturbing trend. The People's Republic of China is escalating its campaign of transnational repression in Canada. From deep fake pornography and digital surveillance to families' intimidation and online smear campaigns, Chinese authorities are using a variety of methods to silence dissent and shape global narratives, even within our borders. The investigation centers on several Canadian-based dissidents, including Uyghur activists, Hong Kong democracy advocates, and pro-Taiwan influencers, who have been systematically targeted by Chinese authority. Yao Zhang, a Quebec-based influencer, became a target after expressing support for Taiwan's independence. She was doxxed, smeared with sexual deepfakes, and had her family harassed in China. Her story isn't unique. Others have been followed, had devices hacked, and even warned by Canadian police to stop campaigning due to security and safety issues, as in the case of political candidate Joe Tay, who is running in Don Valley North. From surveillance cars in Montreal to Interpol red notices and suppressive disinformation campaigns on platforms like WeChat and TikTok, China's campaign is broad, coordinated, and increasingly bold. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a well-documented strategy to neutralize critics wherever they live. This isn't new, but what is new is the scale and audacity of these operations. Dan Stanton, a retired CSIS officer who led the China desk, calls it a long-standing effort to neutralize dissent abroad, especially among members of the Chinese diaspora. These operations fall under the PRC's 5 Poisons framework, targeting pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong, Tibetan activists, Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and supporters of Taiwanese sovereignty. The 2024 passage of Bill 70, which called for Foreign Agent Registry and Foreign Interference Commissioner, was meant to address these threats, but a year later, implementation has stalled, leaving victims with little recourse and Canada exposed to ongoing covert influence campaigns. Stanton explained how China avoids direct confrontation. Instead, they apply soft pressure via family networks, economic coercion, and digital surveillance. The chilling effect on Chinese Canadian communities is real. Many activists, like Mehmet Tohti and Gloria Fung, now alter their daily routines for security reasons and are inundated with cyber attacks and surveillance. Dennis Molinaro, author of Under Siege, argues that Canada is lagging behind countries like the US and Australia in tackling this issue. These are Canadian citizens. This isn't community infighting, he said. This is state aggression. Let's be clear. This is state-sponsored harassment happening on Canadian soil. The PRC's activities, from creating fear in diaspora communities to interfering with our elections, are not just breaches of privacy or human rights. They are national security threats, and victims are asking questions. Where's the enforcement? Where's the promised registry? Why are foreign agents still operating freely in Canada? Canada must stop treating this as an isolated community grievance. This is geopolitical coercion, and it's happening right here, right now. Diaspora communities in Canada will continue to remain silent on these issues if they feel that the Canadian government isn't taking transnational repression seriously, which in turn exacerbates the problem, because this is exactly what the foreign states who are participating in foreign interference and transnational repression are hoping for. Silence and compliance amongst diaspora communities only encourages the efforts of foreign enemies to continue and expand these operations in Canada, leaving Canada, our political system, national security, and our citizens at risk. Sticking with national security news in Canada, our next story looks at a major gap in Canada's national security posture, the promised Foreign Influence Transparency Registry. Nearly a year after Bill C-70 passed with rare bipartisan support, the federal government still hasn't launched the office or appointed a commissioner. For many experts and advocates, this delay isn't just a bureaucratic snag, it's a vulnerability our adversaries are watching very closely. The Foreign Influence Transparency Registry was supposed to be a key tool in Canada's fight against foreign interference. Its purpose? To force anyone acting on behalf of a foreign government to register with the federal government or face serious fines and even prison time. The model isn't new. Canada, like the United States and Australia, have similar systems that have been used to charge or monitor foreign agents operating on their soil. But in Canada, the registry is still in limbo. No commissioner has been appointed, the IT infrastructure isn't in place, and the Public Safety Department can't say when it's going to be operational. Given Canada's national security concerns surrounding foreign interference, as discussed in the last story, the delay is difficult to defend. We know, as confirmed through both media reporting and a public inquiry, that hostile states like China have attempted to influence our elections and target diaspora communities. Without this registry, there is no clear, enforceable framework to expose or deter these activities. So what kind of message does this send to the rest of the world? Canada is lagging behind and lacks the political will to deal with these threats. The idea of a foreign agent registry in Canada has been around since at least 2021, but it gained real traction after mounting allegations of foreign interference in both the 2019 and the 2021 federal elections. These allegations led to a public inquiry which confirmed that foreign actors have attempted to sway voters, though it stopped short of saying the outcome was altered. The passing of Bill C-70 last June marked a turning point. For that moment, it seemed like Canada was finally ready to play catch-up with Five Eye allies on the issue. The bill not only included the registry, but also new powers for CSIS to share intelligence with universities, municipalities, and the private industry, something that is long overdue in response to the evolving threat landscape. But with Parliament prorogued and a federal election now behind us, the registry seems to have stalled. Critics from all political stripes, including the Conservatives and the NDP, are calling out the inaction. And security experts like Dennis Molinaro and advocate Gloria Fung are warning that delay is both symbolic and dangerous. Dennis Molinaro, a former national security analyst turned academic, put it bluntly: it sends a message to adversaries that maybe we're not all that serious. Gloria Fung, who leads the Canadian Coalition for a Foreign Influence Transparency Registry, added that diaspora communities, often the frontline victims of transnational repression, can't afford to keep waiting. Even more liberal-leaning figures are frustrated over the delays. The promise of action has turned into political inertia, raising uncomfortable questions. Why hasn't the commissioner been appointed? Why isn't the infrastructure ready? And why is there still no timeline? On the other side of the debate, groups like U15 Canada, a coalition of top research universities, warned that a poorly designed registry could create a chilling effect on global research collaboration. I find this argument unjustified and counterintuitive. Any post-secondary institution that relies on grants, research, and foreign students to keep their business afloat needs to reconsider what it means to have agents of foreign governments accessing their facilities. If foreign agents are trying to avoid being registered, they are doing so because the activities that they are participating in are at risk to Canadian national security and sovereignty. If that deters them from participating in a research program at a university, college, or research institute, we as Canadians are better off. Canada's lack of progress on the Foreign Influence Transparency Registry is more than a political fumble, it's a national security liability. Our allies have taken this threat seriously. We've acknowledged the problem, passed legislation, and still nothing. If the registry isn't in place before the next election, we risk repeating the same mistakes, or worse. Trust in democratic institutions will erode further. Diaspora communities will continue to face harassment, and hostile actors will see our inaction as an invitation. The time to act was last year. The second best time? Right now. Our next story takes us to Germany, where 3 men, a Ukrainian, an Armenian, and a Russian, have been formally charged with conducting espionage on behalf of Russian intelligence, in what prosecutors are calling a particularly serious case. According to the German Federal Prosecutor's Office, the operation may have involved intent to kill a Ukrainian military veteran now living in Germany. The suspects, identified as Robert A., Ukrainian, Vargas I., Armenian, and Armin S., Russian, were arrested in Frankfurt on June 19, 2024. Prosecutors alleged that the trio was tasked with surveilling a former Ukrainian soldier who fought against Russia following the 2022 invasion. The surveillance operation, ordered by a Russian intelligence agency, may have been a prelude to an assassination attempt. According to the incident, the group attempted to lure the target to a cafe in downtown Frankfurt. Fortunately, the plot fell apart. The intended victim had already been in contact with German police and never showed up for the meeting. Germany, and Europe more broadly, have seen a sharp rise in the covert activity tied to Russian intelligence since the war with Ukraine began. In May 2025, 3 Ukrainians were accused of attempting to send explosive parcels to Ukraine, allegedly under Russian direction. In April, 2 German-Russian dual nationals were charged with plotting attacks on U.S. military sites in Germany, again at the behest of Russian services. Russia's intelligence playbook extends well beyond classic espionage. It now includes covert sabotage, assassination plots, arson, disinformation, and cyber warfare. What these cases illustrate is a strategic shift, from passive intelligence collection to active, violent operations designed to eliminate opponents, silence critics, and disrupt Western support for Ukraine. And this isn't just a new tactic. In 2019, Russian agent Vladimir Krasakov was convicted of executing a former Chechen fighter in broad daylight in Berlin, using a silenced pistol and a bicycle to flee the scene. In 2024, the same convicted killer was released in a prison swap with Ukraine, highlighting just how far Moscow is willing to go to protect and retrieve its operatives. While this latest case hasn't generated public commentary from German intelligence officials, the charges themselves are serious, involving direct links to state-sponsored extraterritorial violence. From my perspective, this case demonstrates the continued use of proxy actors and expendable assets by Russian services. Recruiting individuals from diverse backgrounds, Ukrainian, Armenian, and Russian, allows Moscow to mask direct involvement while expanding the pool of operators available for short-term, high-risk missions. It's also worth noting that this kind of cooperation, targeting dissidents, defectors, or political enemies abroad, mirrors patterns we've seen with Iran, North Korea, and historically with the Soviet Union. German prosecutors have charged 3 individuals with spying for Russia and potentially planning to assassinate a Ukrainian veteran on German soil. The surveillance, the recruitment, and the attempted lure all fit the pattern of state-directed transnational repression. These are not just isolated spy games. They represent a sustained campaign to export conflict into Europe and neutralize Russia's enemies globally. The message is chilling. Not even emergés and veterans living in Western democracies are out of reach. As Canadian support for Ukraine continues, and as Canada itself becomes a more vocal critic of Russian aggression, we must consider the risk of similar operations occurring here. For our last story this week, we turn our attention to a major shakeup in the world surveillance industry. India has rolled out aggressive new testing regulations for CCTV manufacturers amid deepening fears over Chinese espionage. These changes are more than just regulatory red tape. They reflect an escalating geopolitical technology clash rooted in espionage concerns, data sovereignty, and national security. India has introduced a sweeping policy requiring CCTV manufacturers, including global players like Hikvision, Dahua, Xiaomi, Hanwha, and Motorola Solutions, to submit hardware, software, and even source code to government labs before they can sell their surveillance equipment in the country. The move comes amid growing concerns that foreign-made CCTV devices could be used for espionage. Indian officials, referencing China's state security laws and past vulnerabilities, argue that internet-connected surveillance gear could be remotely hijacked and manipulated, a legitimate concern in the era of ubiquitous smart surveillance. India's new policy applies to all new internet-connected CCTV models made or imported since April 9, 2025, triggering pushback from industry players who fear project delays, disruptions, and major revenue losses. One executive warned that the new rules could send tremors through the market. Another cautioned that ongoing infrastructure and commercial projects could grind to a halt. A stark warning for a nation relying on surveillance tech for everything from public safety to critical infrastructure monitoring. This policy is not occurring in a vacuum. It follows years of rising tensions between India and China, from the 2020 military clash at the border to India's banning of Chinese apps like TikTok, to the tightening of foreign investment rules for countries that share land borders with India. What's more, concerns about Chinese surveillance are not unique to India. The United States banned Hikvision and Dua in 2022, and countries like Britain and Australia have followed suit with restrictions on Chinese-made devices due to espionage fears. Indian authorities are particularly wary of China's sweeping national intelligence laws, which compel private companies to assist Beijing's intelligence efforts. Combine that with India's rapid digital expansion, a projected 7 billion surveillance market by 2030, and it's easy to see why regulators are scrambling to regain control over what goes into their surveillance infrastructure. Gulshan Ray, India's former cybersecurity chief, emphasized the core intelligence concern. Anyone can operate and control internet-connected CCTV cameras from an adversarial location that need to be robust and secure. Reuters reports that nearly 80% of all CCTV components used in India originate from China, and companies are struggling to meet demands for lab testing, source code disclosure, and factory audits. The Indian government has thus far refused to delay the implementation, stating the policy addresses a genuine security issue. India's internal guidelines may be implicitly targeting Chinese firms, as evidenced by Xiaomi being asked to disclose additional registration details about China-based contract manufacturers, a request rooted in land border country risk protocols. India's crackdown on surveillance gear underscores a large global trend. Security, not just price or performance, is becoming a defining metric in tech procurement. When technology becomes a new frontline in intelligence warfare, countries must weigh the cost of convenience against the long-term risk of espionage, sabotage, and foreign influence. India's surveillance infrastructure, public and private, is now under unprecedented scrutiny. The question for other countries, including Canada, is, are we doing enough to secure our digital perimeters? Or are we leaving ourselves vulnerable to espionage embedded in the very cameras meant to protect us? Well, that's going to do it for this week. I want to do a quick shout out to all the fans that I had an opportunity to meet at the Speaker Series presentation on Tuesday at the Shakeup Center. The Pillar Society hosted former CSIS Director Ward Elcock, who provided a great breakdown of the challenges that Canada's intelligence community faced while he was at the helm of the service. From Cold War espionage to post-9/11 terrorism, Mr. Elcock guided the service through some very tumultuous times, and it was good to see him receive some of the admiration and appreciation he so rightly deserves. The Pillar Society will be hosting another guest at the Shakeup Center in Orleans in October, and I'll be sure to keep you informed when the date gets closer. Until next week, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That's a wrap for this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. From Sabotage at the Cannes Film Festival to China's growing campaign of transnational repression in Canada, to the sweeping shakeup inside the U.S. National Security Council, each story this week reveals just how fragile and complex our global security environment has become. Delivering this level of insight each week takes time, expertise, and a deep commitment to cutting through the noise. If you found value in this episode, please leave a like, consider sharing it with a friend or colleague, leaving a review, or subscribing to stay informed. You can also support the podcast directly through Patreon or by following the links on Buzzsprout. Every bit helps to keep this important mission going. And remember, you can get the headlines anywhere, but you can only get the insights, analysis, and intelligence here. For more intelligence insights and analysis, visit the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. And as Neil always reminds us, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe. See you next week.